Good afternoon. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Here.
Jill Flessing.
Present.
Linda Heitzman Powell.
Here.
Donna Honer-Queel. Mary Jones.
Here.
Jim Kilmartin.
Good afternoon.
Richard Nobles.
Here.
Andrea's not here. Cynthia Schendel.
Present.
Laura Shaughnessy.
Present.
David Stevens.
Here.
I note the following staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
And Cindy Darkle.
Here.
Tim Resner, serving as legal counsel for the board, is also present.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment to allow sufficient time for the board to discuss all items on the agenda. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On November 21st, 2024, we sent notice of the meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of this meeting, using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There was no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and announce themselves, I will let you know. And I also just saw that Andrea Perdomo Morales has entered through the Zoom waiting room, so she is in attendance as well.
Very good. Thank you, David. Meeting is now called to order, and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which is approval of the agenda. We have a very small agenda today. I'd accept a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. We'll begin discussion of old business, review and finalize items for the 2025 legislative agenda. Dave?
Thank you, Dave. So as you may recall, we are fast approaching the end of the calendar year, and every spring, the legislative session begins in Kansas. It usually starts around the first or second week in January, and then it goes officially for 90 official days, but it could be extended, and sometimes it goes into the middle of April, middle of May, or middle of June. And when the legislative session begins, organizations or individuals are allowed to come to the legislature and request items for introduction in the form of bills to be heard by the different committees. This is one of those opportunities for the board to basically review items that it has previously recommended going forward and requesting legislation. These would be statutory changes, and so this would be items relevant to a bill. And the main process would be that a bill would be drafted, officially introduced with a bill number, either a House bill number or a Senate bill number, and then it would be assigned to a committee. And then behind the scenes, I would be seeking to meet with the chair of that committee and seeking to have our bill receive a hearing. And then if that hearing is scheduled, there would be the opportunity for an explanation of the bill, testimony to be presented in favor or opposed or neutral. And then there would be the opportunity for the committee to work the bill. Ultimately, we would want the bill to be passed by both the House and Senate separately. It would go to a House committee and then to the Senate floor, and then the same thing on the Senate. If there's any items of difference, it could go to something called a conference committee. And if there's a conference committee, that's where the House and Senate have the opportunity to make further adjustments or sometimes combine bills into one. So just thought I'd give you a real quick snapshot of the process, but the meeting today is not a full board meeting. It's really just an hour-long meeting for the board to review items relevant to the legislative agenda and to take some final action here. And just to kind of frame this, this past year, on behalf of the board and the agency, we've really tried to do a lot of outreach to really work with different partners around the state. And we really tried to listen to the priorities of different individuals and different groups. To assist in this, we held our second annual informational forum for both educators and also employers. That was back in September, and we had, I believe, roughly 40 educators there, and then I believe around 50 to 60 employers who attended that forum. And it was an opportunity for them to provide feedback on any items. In the meanwhile, we also met with different representatives from different schools. Leslie and I did presentations. Earlier this year, I did a presentation for a group in Wichita called the Center for Excellence and walked through some of the items that have changed over the last few years for topics relevant to the BSRB. I also, if I hear about different groups, we reach out and we offer, to have conversations and then learn about what their legislative priorities are. To see if there's common ground and where we can work with different groups. And to that effort, we've really tried to work to establish good relationships with the state level associations, and then also, if we can, the national associations as well for the 7 professions regulated by the board. So before we get into the board items, I just kind of wanted to touch upon some of those conversations. One group that I have been working with this year that has been a new but really positive experience, there was an opportunity to work with representatives from the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDAD, and also the representatives from the Board of Regents to partner together and apply for a federal grant. And what this grant did is it provided assistance from representatives at the federal level to really look into different topics to be helpful in the area of things like workforce and other topics like that. So that group has been meeting monthly. There was an opportunity to go to Nashville, Tennessee, and meet with representatives from some other states like Utah and Alaska, and kind of learn what they're looking at in terms of their workforce and studying and quantifying those topics. So that's been a really positive experience. And we'll be having a meeting coming up later this week to talk about items relevant for that. Some of the other groups that I've had a chance to work with, I know I mentioned the Center for Excellence. That is a group that is based here in Kansas, and it represents several different organizations that have come together with some legislative priorities. I just wanted to share, from my conversations working with them, some of the things they're looking at in the area of mental health have to do with looking at training and education for positions, expansion of psychiatric residency slots, looking at addiction fellowship programs, also looking at behavioral health programs to increase applied learning opportunities. A lot of this is specific to the Wichita area or Wichita State University, but some of this is relevant to the remainder of Kansas as well. Expansion of a Master's of Science Family Therapy program, creating undergraduate pathways for graduates to pursue licensed addiction counselor credentials, some other items relevant primarily for Wichita, and then looking at some stipends for social work students in the Master's of Social Work program in behavioral health who would complete practicum experiences with community-based behavioral health organizations. I just kind of wanted to share some of those that I've been learning about with the Center for Excellence. In terms of some other topics that may be relevant to the BSRB, they were looking at creating some career pathways or helping out in that area. One topic they discussed was a counselor assistant program, and they mentioned that Kansas does have a robust peer mentoring certification program with the substance use disorder treatment system, but they indicate that there are limitations on what those individuals would like to do or can do. And a counselor assistant program is something that they are in favor of building and working more with. They also mentioned that they would like to, this is something I've heard from a couple different groups, there is some interest in the addiction counseling field, having some individuals be able to provide some lower level services without having full licensure. And I haven't seen totally developed proposals in this area, but I have just been hearing these thoughts. I wanted to share them with you. There's also a position called a licensed mental health technician. Those mental health technicians are low-level positions and can provide some low-level services. Also, they were looking at building a K through 12 career pathway with the Department of Education, establishing a behavioral health or counseling and mental health services pathway. They also were looking at different things such as reciprocity licensure. I know that's something the board put a lot of focus towards 2 years ago. I know the board lowered or thought to have it passed in legislation and did, lowering the years required for reciprocity for most professions down from 48 months down to 12 months for individuals either that live in Kansas or those that live outside of Kansas. There is some additional language here that talks about one of their goals for the Center of Excellence was eliminating the state requirement for 1-year postdoc training for psychology students. And I know that topic has been something that the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee has recently heard some comments on from the Kansas Psychological Association, but that is something I did see for the Center of Excellence in terms of one of their priorities. And then there was also the topic of supervision from that group. They were talking about under the state of Kansas that there are different requirements for who can provide supervision for certain professions, and they would like there to be more uniformity. Specifically, they were looking for Kansas to implement a policy allowing for 50% of post-licensure supervision to be provided by interdisciplinary professionals. And so I wanted to share that with you as well. There's some other items here that deal more with finances or a reimbursement for services. One of those would involve a market rate study to look at what behavioral health providers are being paid, I believe, in other states. And then some of their other priorities are encouraging the use of telehealth and also implementing more technology in the use of the mental health or behavioral health services. So that is one group that I've been talking to. I wanted to share some of those priorities with you. Another group that I have been working with a little bit and learning more about recently is the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Coalition. This is also a group that has ties to the Sedgwick County or Wichita area. Some of the topics that they had referenced as priorities, I think, have a strong connection to things the board sought to have enacted back in 2023, and a lot of these things were put into place. So I can't tell you for certain if these were items that had previously been a goal and are now addressed through the passage of that bill, or if these things are something where they would want it to go further. I did meet with them, but I didn't totally get clarity on that point. But some of the things they talked about was the reciprocity requirement for licensure, decreasing the number of years of practice for that, which, as I mentioned, have been decreased recently from 48 months down to 12 months. Expanding the time period for temporary licenses, and that was something the board did seek to get put into law, and it was for most of the professions. It changed the time period for a temporary license from 12 months to 24 months. They talked about establishing new license categories, and we have looked into that recently. We've established a number of new bridge licenses, new temporary licenses for the student temporary addiction counseling license, a new one for the social work for students from non-accredited programs so that they can practice under that temporary license until their school becomes accredited. So there have been a number of new licenses. So I think that ties to some of their priorities. There was a priority as far as decreasing continuing education requirements related to diagnosis and treatment. And while this was not something the board pursued, in the bill that passed during the 2023 legislative session, 2023 was a sub for Senate Bill 131. The number of hours in diagnosis and treatment as of July 1st, 2025 will be reduced from 6 hours to 3 hours. So that was something passed in the bill with a future implementation date, but there is a connection to that item as well. There is some other information in here as far as increasing the membership on the BSRB board, but I don't have specific details about that. And then there was some other different topics. One talked about requiring that clinical social work supervisors be approved by the board. And I know that is an item the board has put forward a couple of times in the past, but legislative committees have removed that item at least 2 occasions when the board had previously brought that up. So there are some other items that involve more tax credits and different things like that, but those don't necessarily have a specific connection to the BSRB. There was also a reference, though, about the peer mentor certification and expanding services that can be provided by certain types of counselors. I wanted to share that information as well. And so those are 2 groups. I just kind of wanted to share some of their legislative priorities. Like I said, we look for common ground when we can work with different groups. I thought I would share some of that. Now, I think I'll turn to the items that the board has discussed over the past few months. And I have put together a list of items that the board has selected, either items to go forward with in terms of legislation, or items the board said we want to have this as a conversation point, but we will table this and bring it back. So I wanted to make sure to confirm all of these with you. If you would like to make any further adjustments, this is probably the last opportunity to do that. That way we can make sure to have it in bill form for the legislature so that it'll be ready when the committees start having hearings. So if any of you have any questions on any of these items, please feel free to jump in with questions. And then I'll kind of go through each one. And if there's no further changes, we will take this and then we will reach out to the chair of the health committees and start to have those conversations about getting hearings for the bill once it is introduced in front of the legislature. Officially, we don't have the authority to introduce a bill, but what we can do is go to those committees and then ask the committee if they will introduce the bill on our behalf. And usually in the past, there has not been any issue with that. So starting first, in terms of the items for the legislative agenda, as I mentioned, during the 2023 legislative session, there was a significant bill passed. A lot of those items were items brought forward by the board to help out with workforce and other topics. One of those items was the creation of a student temporary addiction counseling license. And among the requirements for this type of a license, individuals needed to be essentially in a bachelor level program or potentially a master's program, but they needed to have an agreement that they, with their school and also with a potential employer, that if they were hired as a student temporary worker, they would be under supervision. They needed to have merited the public trust, and then specific to their coursework, they needed to have completed 60 hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field. And then they would need to basically finish that coursework while working over the next 2 years. They could have that temporary license extended one time for an additional 2 years. And then ultimately it was looked at as a path, a bridge to get them to a permanent level license as a licensed addiction counselor. And so the board, as I mentioned to the board before, this has been very successful. I think currently there's somewhere around 45 individuals who currently hold this temporary student level license. It's been a nice bridge, and there's also a handful of other individuals that previously held this license and it is now obsolete because they have transitioned over to the permanent licensed addiction counselor license. So this has been a nice tool. The board is in favor of expanding this, and so the proposal put before the legislature this year would be to change the statutory language to expand 2 different groups to be able to qualify for this license as well. And one of these is, I'll just clarify. So as I mentioned, the current group of individuals would need to have 60 hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field. The proposal on the table is for the language to be expanded to include other individuals who have 60 hours that is not necessarily specific to addiction counseling or a related field, but those individuals are currently enrolled in a program that is for addiction counseling or a related field. Similarly, the third group of individuals that this would be expanded to would be individuals in a master's program who hold a bachelor's level license or a bachelor's level degree already, and that degree does not have to have a connection to addiction counseling or a related field. But if they're currently enrolled at a master's program that is addiction related or it's a related field, they would be eligible for this student temporary licensed addiction counselor license. So it would still have the same scope of practice. as the individuals that are completing coursework at the bachelor's level, but it would provide a bridge in the same way for individuals as they get close to finishing their master's degree. It would ultimately be seeking to get that LMAC license. So I'll pause there and see if there's any further comments or if the board is still in favor of moving forward with that proposal for the legislature.
Any feedback?
I like what I hear so far, and I like that, they have 45 people that are taking advantage of this opportunity. Do you have a lot of inquiries about it?
Yes, especially when we first started, there was a little bit of confusion about who could qualify and what the criteria would be. And Leslie Allen's on the call. She's the one who primarily has talked with, I think, some of the people who looked for some more flexibility in this area. So, Leslie, do you have any comments to Laura's statement there?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of inquiries about it. I think it's helpful.
Good to hear. Any problems with the related field? Anybody stretching that a little too far?
When they have, I've brought it to you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, seeing no further comments as far as any changes, we will move forward with requesting statutory language for those flexibilities in a bill before the legislature this year. Item number 2. So we have talked about supervision this year in different ways, and individuals that have or seeking a clinical level license for the professional counseling profession, they need to obtain 3,000 postgraduate hours, and then 1,500 have to be, providing psychotherapy and assessments, and they need to have 100 hours of supervision during that process. And there has been request for some of that flexibility in terms of who can be a supervisor for that group. There's been a lot of discussion on this point. And so this is also a profession that has a board approved supervisor process. And so the proposal that was put before the board from the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee was to include language in the statute clarifying that for the professional counseling profession, up to 50% of the supervision hours could be provided by someone with the appropriate level license from another profession. And I wanted to add a little bit more specificity to that. So I've talked with Leslie, and basically this person would still need to be a board approved supervisor. The requirement to provide supervision is that someone held a license at the appropriate level for practice for 2 years. So those are basically standard requirements for people providing supervision. But furthermore, in terms of the license types that it would qualify for, this would be a licensed psychologist type license, or it would be a clinical license under the other professions, with the exception of addiction counseling. And that has historically been the way it's been looked at, because addiction counseling have a limited scope of practice. So a clinical addiction counselor may not be able to diagnose and treat the full range of mental impairments, whereas the other clinical levels of license would have no restriction based on the DSM. So that is the language that Leslie and I talked about. I just kind of wanted to bring forward and see if there were any questions about that or any requests for further adjustments.
I have a clarifying question. Did you say they would have to be a BSRB approved supervisor?
That was the proposal, is that for the professional counseling profession, anyone providing supervision does have to be a board approved supervisor. So they would need to be a board approved supervisor, but in addition to meeting that requirement and then having the appropriate level license and practice for 2 years, up to 50% of the hours could be provided by someone who holds the clinical level license from another profession, with the exception of addiction counseling.
Yeah, that was my question. Does the other profession have to be a BSRB approved supervisor?
I think both people who'd be providing supervision would need to be a BSRB approved supervisor from my understanding.
Because isn't there only one other group that does that?
Right.
Only marriage and family.
Just NFTs.
Right. There's a board approved process, and it's required for professional counseling and marriage and family therapy. But there is a pathway for people from other professions to become a board-approved supervisor in those fields. Leslie, do you mind commenting on that a little bit?
Sure, they just, someone from a different profession would still need to complete the 15 hours of training that's required to become an LCPC board approved supervisor. So they actually become an LPC board approved supervisor by training, but they just have a different professional license.
So realistically, this provision would open it up to LMFTs to or LCMFTs to supervise, but the other professions would have to go an extra step if they wanted to provide that supervision.
Yes.
Well, yes, they would have to take the extra step that the LCPCs and LCMFTs already did, yes.
And this is a proposal for you today. So if you do have other thoughts, it could definitely be discussed right now in terms of proposal moving forward.
Just in case anyone's wondering, the MFT Advisory Committee has addressed this now multiple times in the advisory committee, and it is the general sense, the majority, that MFTs are not wanting to put forth the same proposal. And again, understanding that it could be subject to anyway, but they're not wanting to do that on behalf of MFTs.
And just to clarify too, so to make sure that we have the appropriate language in the statute, as part of this process, we'll be, if this proposal is not changed, the language for the professional counselors will be included in statute with this new flexibility to allow up to 50% of the hours to be provided by someone from another profession. And for the marriage and family therapy profession, there will be language in the statute to clarify the existing requirements right now, which would call for an extenuating circumstance for someone providing that level of supervision if they want to go outside of the profession. So just wanted to clarify that both of the professions, since they're board approved supervisors, they will need to have some statutory language in the bill to clarify that. But for the professional counseling, it's a new process. For marriage and family therapy, it's the existing process that is formalized in the statute.
Other comments or feedback?
I just wonder how many potential supervisors from other professions that don't already require the additional hours, et cetera, would really sign up to do that. So this may have a very limited effect if practically the existing potential supervisors that would be able to provide that 50% would be only the MFTs.
I agree. I do think it might have a limiting effect, but I think actually in a way that's going to be a positive thing. I think if you're really, if you work at an agency or you work somewhere where, you really want to be able to provide supervision, yes, it is a hoop, but I think it's a good one to go through to get in parity with licensed professional counselor supervision guidelines. So I do think it is going to be a little bit limiting, but for good reason.
Anyone else?
Okay, well, I'll move on to the next item. The next item, there was a recommendation from the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee. Currently in the statutes, KSA 74-7501A specifically, it references the 12 members of the board, and it says there's distinctly 8 professional members, 4 public members, and of the 8 professional members, it does call out specifically 2 licensed psychologists, 2 social workers, and then 1 professional member from the other 4 professions on the board, with the exception of behavior analysis. There's not currently a behavior analyst named as a board member. And so there was a recommendation by the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee to ask the board to add a 13th board member and have that be named specifically in the statute as a behavior analyst on the board. And the board previously considered this and made a recommendation to request language adding a 13th board member to the board of the BSRB specifically for the behavior analyst profession.
So that
I
was something
continue
we've
to,
done.
sorry, David.
I was just going to say that's something we have supported previously.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, not seeing any questions or other comments, we'll move that one forward as well. The next item is basically a new process to help schools and be responsible with utilization of our staff time. So we have been approached at times from schools, mostly outside the state, that have requested that we review their coursework and programs and give them an opinion whether their program meets the requirements for licensure in Kansas. The problem is that for us to use staff time to do that, there's no way to appropriately charge those programs or those schools for providing that service. And it does take time away from us being able to work on licensed applicants. And so we do see the value in this, and we would like to provide an opportunity for us to do this. And so the proposal is to add language to the statutes that would be to develop a process to allow an individual or school to request review of an academic program and an evaluation whether that program and coursework meets the requirements for licensure in Kansas under one of the professions for the BSRB. It would also include some language in that section of the statute to allow us to charge a fee for that. Usually in the statute, it basically sets a cap and says a fee not to exceed X amount of dollars. So I was talking with Leslie, one of the groups that we work with that provides a number of reviews for us in terms of when we need an expert to review a program. They charge a fee of $150. So I thought perhaps bringing to you a suggestion of setting the fee cap at $200 might be a nice place to put that. In case I don't see any reason for us to need to make any money off this process, but I certainly don't want us to lose money on it either. So in a situation like that, we could set the cap at $200 and then in the regulations perhaps set the amount at $150. And then if that group were to raise their prices on us in the future, we'd have a little bit of flexibility there. So wanted to bring that proposal to you again today with a little bit more specificity to set a fee cap of $200 for that evaluation.
Dave, would there be a kind of an update option? Because if we say this program meets criteria today, they're constantly changing and evolving, and next year it might not if they change some of theirs. So would there be kind of a follow-up where you could submit any changes in your program from the previous year, again for a fee, but probably a lower fee, to make sure that you continue to meet criteria?
So the proposal that we initially talked about was that they would get affirmation or confirmation that their program meets for a year. And
Okay.
If they had any significant changes, they could resubmit. I think it's important to note that no school would need to. No school is required to do this.
Right.
If they wanted that assurance, they could do that. So I think having that year-long affirmation, and then, but in terms, we don't really have a developed process for allowing them to make minor requests for reviews. Just kind of the major one. But if you have any thoughts on that, we could discuss that.
Okay.
Dave, is it possible within the state system that when we look at things like this for regulation, is it possible to do a cost plus instead of a fixed fee that could trap you?
And Jim, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the cost plus.
Well, in other words, you don't want to make money, and that's fine. But if the cost goes up to $225 from this group next year, you're losing money. And so my concept of cost plus is cost plus 30% or 33% or 35%. And if you put that in the regulation, then it can always move without any big hassle. Am I misinterpreting that? Or it seems like it's going to be a hassle to change it in 5 years, and everything is going to increase.
Yeah.
So when you lock a dollar amount, then you unlock a dollar amount by cost plus.
Okay. That's a very interesting thought, because some of these would be provided by certain entities that would charge us a flat fee. I was envisioning that other times we would have either our staff or maybe in-state experts provide that service as well. So I'm not familiar with the statutes listing that, but I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. So
Just a suggestion. I've used it in other areas before, and it's just because when you got to go back and seek approval, it's like, oh boy,
right,
here we go.
yeah,
Anyway, that's just a comment.
yeah. No, I kind of like that. Leslie, do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe.
I have not seen that, but if it was possible, it would be good.
Okay, maybe cost plus $50 for the amount of staff time that's necessary, and then with a fee not to exceed. I think they still like to have a cap in there of some amount, but we could definitely include a higher cap, knowing that the 200 is kind of tight with what we are currently being charged. Maybe $400, something like that, knowing that it's going to be likely a lot closer to 150, 200.
That gives us a lot more wiggle room.
Yeah,
Okay, so cost plus 50, cap not to exceed $400. Okay. And like I said, we'll make it very clear that no, entities are required to seek this, but if they choose to seek it, it would be nice for us to be able to provide that as a service, knowing that any staff time we use will be staff time we're not spending working with applicants, so we want to be responsible for that too. Okay. Well, if I don't see any other comments, we'll just go ahead and move forward with that proposal. The next has to do with continuing education providers. So currently right now, we audit 10% of all licensees when they renew their license. And at that time, they have to demonstrate they've completed the necessary continuing education hours. We have recently been working with CE Broker, and they provide a really nice portal for people to upload that documentation. They also have provided a portal for us so that individuals wishing to become a continuing education pre-approved provider or submitting a course to become pre-approved, they can do that through the BSRB CE Broker agreement. And so we currently only have authority to do those pre-approved designations for the social work profession, but we thought this would be a good opportunity for us to open this up for the other professions. The reason we don't pre-approve every CE is because it would take a tremendous amount of staff time for us to review all those courses on the front end, and knowing that we only audit 10%, it wouldn't probably be the best use of our time in terms of providing all those reviews and doing this. However, for the social work profession, the way it works right now is there may be some individuals creating a course that would like to advertise this is specifically BSRB pre-approved, so that people will have that assurance that it will meet the requirements in case there's any question. And so the same method would be that we would open this up for the other professions, but it would not be required of anyone. But if they wanted to optionally pursue that for a fee, they could do that. And I think the same fees that we would use for the social work, it seems reasonable to go ahead and use those same fee amounts for this for other professions. And Leslie, do you recall what those amounts are for the continuing education pre-approved plans or pre-approved providers?
So it's $100 for the first year for a pre-approved provider. And then they renew for 3 years, and the renewal fee is $250. And the single programs are $50 each.
And currently right now, when people do this pre-approval review, they're looking specifically for the social work profession. Opening this up, we see that there could be a value in some of these courses applying to more than one profession, but also it may be complicated for the reviewer at the time they're reviewing this to give an opinion whether it meets the requirements for professional counseling and marriage and family therapy and social work. So I guess the immediate thought process we had, or I wanted to bring to you today, would be that basically this would open up to all the professions, but these providers would still be looking to see, is this pre-approved for the social work profession? Is this pre-approved for professional counseling? Or if they want to have it be pre-approved for other professions, they could certainly pursue that. But just to make sure that we're, not trying to overextend the staff and say, review this with the requirements in mind for every profession. I think the starting point would be that it would be specific to one profession, unless they wanted to pay more and have it be applicable to other professions. But that is certainly something open for discussion. If you'd like us to take a different approach, we definitely would like to hear your comments today. And again, this is something new, but I mean, it's new for other professions. It's not required, so we don't know how many people would optionally choose to pursue this. We just have heard other people at times request for it, and we've had to basically say we can't officially give you that designation because the only authority we currently have is for the social work profession. This would be nice to at least offer it to people if they chose to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
The one question I have is, if it's approved for LMFTs, do they have to pay and get it approved for every profession? I mean, they could just be approved as one if we're gonna just do one and still provide it to other professions, correct?
I think under this scenario, they would be specifically looking to have it be pre-approved for one profession. If you wanted it to be pre-approved for other professions, you would pay a different fee, per profession you wanted it to be approved for. Now, you don't have to pay the fee for any profession. You could basically have it be pre-approved for marriage and family therapy, and then you could continue to offer it to other professions that just wouldn't be specifically pre-approved. But like I said, I just kind of wanted to, this is a little bit new, so I wanted to bring it to you and kind of get your thoughts on this.
Are there different requirements for being for the CEs in each? I mean, I thought we were pretty uniform in our requirements of CEUs. So why wouldn't provide an offering that is valid for one profession be kind of automatically appropriate for the others as well? I mean, what's in the regs is very broad about what we can do for CEs.
Yeah, I guess and that's a very good question. And that's something that Leslie and I had talked about too. I guess what I was envisioning is if there was a continuing education course in addiction counseling, or it was the focus of it was addiction counseling, could our reviewers say this is also approved for the social work profession, or this is also approved for the psychology profession, if really the subject matter was with a focus for addiction counseling? And so I wasn't sure how complicated it would be to go ahead and open this up and say, if you're approved for one, you're approved for all, because there may be some subject matter differences. Maybe some of them would be broad and they'd be applicable to all, but that's something we were wrestling with a little bit.
Yeah, and
Well-
Cynthia, I mean, just to jump in, if you're a provider under the social work, like you pre-approved provider, you have certain criteria you have to meet in terms of who's involved in planning and meetings and all of that. Board of Nursing is the same way. So it's driven from the perspective of that profession. So it does get a little complicated if you are a pre-approved provider. It would be nice if you didn't have to do all that, but so I would envision if you're opening it up per profession that those composition things might be similar.
Well, I mean, I think the providers, most of the CE offerings that I see are open to multiple professions. They aren't specific to social work. They might be, a specific area like couples therapy, or it might be addictions, but it's open to any of the professions. And at least the regs for social work allow, cross-disciplinary CEs. So I have a hard time thinking that somebody would pay to be certified to provide to just one profession, when currently most of the offerings are offered across the board. And like
But
you
you
say,
can
I
only,
guess
sorry. I was going to say you can only, like if you're a CEU provider, which my organization is, that we can only put out there that we're approved by BSRB for social work or Kansas Board of Nursing for nursing, because those are the only approvals we have that are pre-designated.
but other
We know that most professions, most of them will work for MFT as an example, or professional counselors, but we can't hang that out there. We can't put
Right.
that out there. Yeah.
You can't say it's approved for it, but you can offer
Right.
it. And so I get, then I guess the only advantage is that people within that discipline know for sure that they're the rest, anybody else taking the course is rolling the dice.
And I guess an alternative solution potentially, and Leslie might know how much more complicated this would be to offer basically two options. One, to be a pre-approved provider or pre-approved course in a specific area, or maybe pay a little bit extra to be a pre-approved provider in multiple ones as long as you qualify. I don't know how much longer you think that sort of analysis would take, Leslie, but I'm curious.
Well, so when I was thinking about it, I'm sorry, so I have to kind of, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking in terms of like they would be a BSRB pre-approved provider. So if they were people from any of the professions that our board regulates, they could offer to any of the boards, to any profession, CEU. I don't know, because we're just starting to do it online, so I don't know exactly how fluid the new system will be in reviewing things. But it does get, like we've had LPCs apply to, or LCPCs apply to become a board approved supervisor, but they don't have a social worker working with them to develop the courses. And so they can't become pre-approved providers. So in what I was thinking was it wouldn't be profession specific, it would be more broad for all professions, and any of the professions could provide and develop the programs. The only, the biggest thing that I can see would be a code of ethics. They're different for each profession. And, like BSWs, they have different courses that, that are not as mental health focused, and, it's just a different practice than the rest. But that's kind of how I was thinking about it. So I don't know if each profession has their own pre-approval process and they have to have that profession developing the courses, then it would be pretty, I think, labor intensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see that.
Okay, well, do we want to, at least as far as introducing this, kind of limit it to each profession versus a broad one? Is that kind of what we're hearing, or is there other feelings?
I mean, if Leslie can do what she just said, that's ideal, because, then you don't have to, you're still having a licensed professional help develop the curriculum. But in my mind, that would be much better than applying under each profession.
And Leslie, do you think it would be more staff time to do that type of review to ensure that somebody was meeting the requirements for each individual one?
No, because they would all, most of the things that I see come across as CEs would be applicable to all the professions. If we wrote it that way, there wouldn't be anything specific to each profession that I would need to look for. It would be more broad.
Okay. Well, let's.
But what exists now would still be there, right? Which that you have to have, if it's a social work offering it, you have to have a social worker help to develop it. So would you have to have a member of each profession?
Well,
on
no,
the
that's
planning?
what I was thinking, because before, when it was discussed, it wasn't as long as the committees kind of felt like, as long as there were professionals developing it, people with degrees in the profession or licenses, that it wouldn't have to be specific to a profession. So what I was thinking of was more of a BSRB. So there wouldn't need to be a social worker specific for social work. It could be a psychologist or a social worker or a counselor. and vice versa for their, so it would kind of replace the social work pre-approval,
I see. Okay.
unless you want both.
Well, we're starting to get close on time, so we can attempt to do what Leslie's talking about and write it up, and then we can, if it is passed by the legislature, we could try to track the time, and if it becomes an issue, we can bring it back potentially in future years. But is there a preference to have someone be pre-approved in multiple professions? Would that be easier for licensees significantly? Okay, let's pursue that then, and we will draft that up and we'll introduce that.
The only thing I have to say is, I was quiet because as a BCBA, the only CEs that count are ones that are offered by somebody that's been pre-approved by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board to be able to provide that CE. So just to keep that in mind, that it might be it might be okay to be broad with regards to most of the professions that recognize that there is benefit in cross-disciplinary education. The BACB is pretty prescriptive.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to include some language that we're talking about BSRB approved or BSRB license requirements, but that does not necessarily extend to what associations may be looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Two items I wanted to touch upon really quickly. We talked a little bit about the language in the construction of act statutes for marriage and family therapy and addiction counseling that basically carved out you don't have to be licensed if you are a student or intern at an academic institution, but there was also language that said preparing for the practice of addiction counseling or marriage and family therapy. That preparing for the practice was not clearly defined. We weren't sure that it was helping anyone in particular. And upon review, both advisory committees recommended deleting that language from the statutes, and the board recommended that as well. So unless there's any other questions about that, that's something we'll move forward on as well. And then at the out-of-town planning meeting, I talked to you about two statutes for the professional counseling profession that were fees. At the time, there were two different fee statutes with slight differences that we were needing to reconcile. Since that point, the revisor's office has reconciled those, so those are no longer needing to go forward as a technical correction. That's one item we can take off the plate. And then I apologize for leaving little time for this, but there were two items the board had previously tabled for the social work profession. This is language that was removed from the statute or altered back during the 2023 legislative session. It focused on the requirements for clinical licensure as a social worker, and basically it changed some of the language. So previously, individuals pursuing a clinical license as a social worker needed to have 15 hours of coursework, and the 2023 legislature deleted 4 of those classes, leaving just a 3-hour pathology class. There was also language that required 3,000 hours of postgraduate experience, including 1,500 hours of direct client contact, providing psychotherapy and assessment. And the language was modified that instead of providing that for 1,500 hours, the 1,500 hours would include but be not limited to providing psychotherapy and assessment. And so a recommendation from the Social Work Advisory Committee was to restore that language back to the previous language. But there was also a proposal to basically create a new type of license, and that was for an advanced generalist for social work. And this would be a new specialist level license for people to practice independently, but not be able to diagnose and treat, as sort of a compromise solution. And the board had tabled these proposals, asked the representatives from the board on the social work advisory committee, the social work members of the board, and then also some BSRB leadership to meet with representatives from NASW Kansas and see if we could work together on these proposals. We did have that meeting. I can open it up if the members of this board on the social work members of the board would like to discuss that meeting or bring back your thoughts. It was just as a summary from me, it appeared from a high level that there probably was not going to be common ground that we could work together on these proposals for this year. But I'll defer to Andrea and Cynthia if you want to share comments from that meeting or your thoughts on these proposals right now.
I think that's a fair summary. There's a lot of concern about opening up the statute at all, because that's how we got this situation in the first place. The last time we proposed a bill and this reduction in the clinical hours required, or the nature of the clinical hours required, was an add-on. And because there wasn't support when we met about reversing that, and there was some questioning of asking the legislature to change something they just passed. And I don't think we're going to have a receptive legislature for doing anything that would restore any requirements versus reducing them at this point, because the trend and the concern of the legislature has been and is likely to continue to be in the near future, trying to deregulate and remove any barriers or make it easier for people to get licensed. So Social Work Advisory Board voted to hold off on requesting these changes at this time. Andrea, do you have anything to add on that?
No, you both summarized it well.
We're concerned about letting this ride, because so far we haven't had anyone who has gotten their clinical license under these reduced requirements. And once that does happen, it's going to be a lot harder to rescind it, I think, or to restore it. But we just felt like it was very unlikely that those changes would be approved by the legislature at this point.
And just to clarify, even though the board was not supportive of those changes back in 2023, the legislature did pass that. We sent out an announcement back on June 30th explaining the new changes to the requirements for clinical social work license. We've been enforcing those since that time. We've updated information on our website. We've had adjustments to forms. So as Cynthia said, the board has expressed its concern on that issue. We do still intend to meet with representatives from NASW Kansas regularly to look for ways in which we can collaborate and work on future proposals. So I'm optimistic about that. But yes, Cynthia and Andrea, your comments from that meeting are well heard. So it sounds like those items were previously tabled by the board. The advisory committee made a new recommendation not to move those items forward for this legislative session. So it sounds like the current item for the board is to perhaps go ahead and just table these indefinitely, at least for this legislative session.
David, I'm sorry, I have a 1 o'clock that I've got to get off to. Thank you.
And that was the end of my list in terms of legislative items. Unless there were any new items that members of the board wanted to introduce today, or if there was anything that I missed. I tried to look through my notes from several past meetings, and I think I have a comprehensive list, but wanted to open it up in case there were any new items.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Well, I will do my best to keep you informed. I do want to let you know they've started making announcements in terms of chairs on the House side. The House Chair of House Health and Human Services, Representative Will Carpenter. I had the opportunity to work with him quite a bit when I was at the Legislative Research Department. I have a lot of respect for him and his history working in the health field in terms of the legislature. He's been the past chair of Social Services Budget Committee for several years, and just recently he was chair of House Fed and State. So looking forward to working with him this session. And I don't have news on the Senate appointments yet for the health committees, but looking forward to working with the member of the Senate who's appointed as the chair of Public Health and Welfare. Any other questions before we wrap up everything for today? Well, I appreciate your time. I know this was a tight schedule, but I appreciate you making time for us to clean these items up. I will keep you informed on the progress. And when the legislative session starts, I will keep you updated in terms of BSRB budget items and bill items as well.
Thank you
Yes.
for all your hard
Thank you.
work.
Yeah,
Thank you all, and have a wonderful holiday season.
You
Yes,
need a
happy
motion to
holidays.
adjourn.
Well,
You need a
Bye.
motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you.
So moved. Have a wonderful holiday, all.
All
You
right.
too, everyone.
Bye.
thank
Thank
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.